University School of Medicine, homeopath, and on the faculty of the Australian Academy of Ionic Medicine. Board member of the Functional Water Society of Japan and North America. Board member of the American Holistic Institute, student at the Rothma Ancient School of Wisdom. She's a happy daughter, mother, and grandmother. 5 generations of her family is still alive and well. And may you join me in presenting Ms. Dr. Mona Harrison.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And once we get all this equipment together, hopefully we'll have some fun this afternoon. The only thing that I ask of you this afternoon is that you have an open mind. We're going to share some things that may seem a little strange to some of you. Others, it'll just be old hat. But for those of you that are hearing it for the first time, we ask you to contemplate it a little bit longer. I had the opportunity approximately 12 years ago to discover the magic of water. And I got so excited about it that I began to share that with my patients. And of course they turned back to me and said, Doc, okay, we're getting the message that water is special and that we should drink it, but what water should we drink? And so that at that time, the only water that we had that was used for cleaning up the body or having an interface with the body was the still water. What has happened over the last 12 years is that my curiosity and my God has allowed me to go all over the world. It has actually drawn me to certain places around the world. And I could be on vacation and just happen to be sitting on a plane next to somebody that puts another piece of the puzzle together. I look forward next month to going high in the Himalayas of Russia and China, meeting with gentlemen that are over 200 years of age, and putting together some other pieces of the puzzle in terms of the magic of water. And when I look at this earth, and we can learn all we need to know from nature. And I see that at this time that our planet is in trouble. That 15% of the water on the earth should be drinkable. Only 1% is drinkable. And really less than that now. I begin to say, boy, we're having a problem here. When I know that my body chooses to be approximately 85% water, and my brain would like to be 90% water, and ideally, as a newborn, would like to be 99% water, I'd say again, we're in trouble. And when I look to see what water am I going to drink, that will allow my body to get in that kind of shape. When I look off the coast, as you are close to the water here in Philadelphia, and I recognize that most of the oxygen that we breathe comes from plants in the sea, not from the trees on the earth. And I find that the ocean plants have actually turned into a virtual desert. They no longer exist. And so the 15% oxygen content that we should be breathing is now down to, the 25 to 30% oxygen content that we were breathing even 20 years ago is now down to 18%. At 14%, we all go into coma. So we have real problems right now with our water, with our air. And what can we do about it? As I look at the earth and it being 85% water also, I say there's similarities here. So that as the earth is dying, so are we. If I take a gentleman at age 70 and measure the amount of water in his body, we find that he has half the amount of water in his body that he had when he was 40 years of age. If that same 70-year-old man was also obese, I find that he'd have half of that. So in fact, do we age or do we just dry up? We have a problem. And as I say, all life on earth is dependent on water. Now, what does water look like? I'm projecting here a model of water taken by a Dr. Emoto in Japan, who has perfected a way of looking at what a water crystal looks like. And it should look just like that. See if we can get this better focus. Anyone that's a little bit more technical than I am. Okay. Needless to say, this is a 6. It may be as clear as we can get for the moment. I think it's maybe the picture itself is off. Needless to say, the 6-sided crystal structure is what a water molecule looks like under an electron microscope. And this is what it ideally should look like. It should have the 6 pointed star shape to it in structure. This is what tap water looks like under the same conditions in the electron microscope. No structure whatsoever. We got a problem. Now, what is going on with our water systems? And I'm going to take for granted that you know a certain amount of things about what's happening in water. Maybe I shouldn't do that, but we're going to zero in on some of the more difficult information that we can get to. But if I take one simple thing here, like chlorine, what happens when I add chlorine to the water? Remember that chlorine was used during the First World War as a gas to kill folks. When you take a shower every day, you take gas of chlorine into your lungs. when that gas of chlorine enters your lungs and it mixes with decaying vegetable substance in your body, it turns into what we call trihalomethanes, or THMs. Now, what's a trihalomethane? One of those long words. It's cleaning fluid. Same thing your cleaners uses to clean your clothes. That's what you just created in your digestive tract. And it is a known cancer-causing agent. So something as simple as just simply taking a shower, where you've not used the right implement on your shower head, can create your exposure to cancer. If that's exposed to decaying meat substance, now what am I talking about here again? I'm talking about a slow-moving bowel, where your stuff's moving very slowly out of your system. Now I've created a pace in that digestive tract, which creates arteriosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. All proven facts. And all I did was take a shower every morning without knowing it. Now, not to put my finger on any particular manufacturer, but when I know I've got big pockets, and therefore I can get commercials on the TV set, and thus the Brita filter, which has been on the market for several years, is owned by the Clorox company. How long does it last? Approximately 2 weeks. And then you begin to reintroduce back into that water what you thought you were taking out. Keep those things in mind when you're talking about, I got clean, safe water, that I am giving to myself and to my children. And my gauge that a water is safe enough is, can I give that water to my grandchild safely? Because he's totally dependent on us to give him what he eats and drinks. So can I safely give him this substance and know that he doesn't have to worry about it, or I don't have to worry about it either? That's your gauge. Forget the courts. Yes, I do want it to stand up in court if I have to go. Yes, I do want it to stand up to academic scrutiny if I have to go. So a lot of pretenders out there say that they have things that'll make your water safe, but will it hold up to the scrutiny that it needs? What's a property of a water? And I'm going to take this down because it's very hard for me to talk into a mic, and I'm just going to hold it. There, I feel more comfortable. What are some of the properties of what we call bioavailable waters? And what do I mean by bioavailable waters? That means not only does this water I drink go right through me and make me go to the bathroom, but does it give something back to the cells? Does it allow those cells to begin to heal themselves? That's what I call a bioavailable water. So that it's going to give something good back to the body. Now understand that drinking almost any water will help. And we would probably eliminate half of the diseases on the planet if we just got people to drink water. But what are some of the characteristics? We saw the crystalline structure earlier in terms of what it should look like. Another characteristic is it should have small molecular clusters. Now, all water clusters, as you can see, tap water, but it's the size of the cluster that makes the difference. And tap water is up there around 13 to 15 molecules per cluster. By the time I get down to the waters that are bioavailable, they're between 5 to 7 molecules per cluster. And that small size is significant. If you can think of clustering as like a cluster of grapes, and they begin to move together like that when we look at them. Those crystals come together in a crystal cluster, just like a cluster of grapes. And the smaller they are, the easier it is for that water to enter the brain and the tissues of the body. Now, most non-small clustered waters cannot cross what we call the blood-brain barrier. That means they cannot get into the brain cells because they're too large. They cannot get into the tissues and organs of the body, like your heart, like your lungs. They have difficulty. It's like a secondary effect to get there. the bioavailable waters go right to the brain and allow that brain to get that 90% water that we want it to have. So clustering and size of the cluster becomes very significant. Now in 1995, U.S. government did its thing, and that was, it said to the American people, okay, there is no safe water left in the United States that you can drink. No safe water left in the United States. And that was a one-day announcement. And they've done their public service to announce to the public. But what they said was boil your water or use reverse osmosis. Now in boiling your water, many of the toxins in the water just get more concentrated. So it really made the problem even worse. With reverse osmosis, it's a good way of taking things out of the water, but it's very expensive. Membranes have to be changed every quarter, and it takes too much out. You're left with what we talk about in water circles as dead water. It gives nothing back to the body. So you've got to add things in order to have it interact with the cells of your body. So reverse osmosis, or the things that they recommended, weren't really that good. Now I want you to notice at the bottom of this, electrolysis, because there are machines that use that process to change your tap water into what would be comparable to vegetable juice. Now this isn't the same electrolysis as taking hairs off of your chin or whatever, and people say, electrolysis, oh, I know what that is. No, this is a special process that the plates in the machine, and this is something to look for, are made from platinum and titanium, not stainless steel. This is the way you want to discern, do I have something that's going to do what I want it to do? It should have platinum and titanium plates in it. Now, why electrolysis? If I compare, and let's look at this for a moment, a gentleman by the name of Professor Vincent in France attempted to put together a standard that one could use to measure what is good water, what fits in a category ideally as a bioavailable water. And so he looked at three factors: resistance, the purity, pH, and the RH2, which breaks down to the oxidation reduction potential. Now, if I put this back on, and we compare electrolysis waters to reverse osmosis, we see, number one, that the pHs don't tend to vary so much when we get to electrolysis. They're at least 7.0, as compared to 5.3 to 6.8 for reverse osmosis water. And many of the distilled waters on the market, if you're going to the store and buying them out of the bottle, are running a pH anywhere from 5.3 usually to about 6.8. They're below 7, which they should not be. The electrolysis water is running on one side from +3 to +400, and on the other side from -3 to -400 in the oxidation reduction potential. Now, what's that? We have found a characteristic of the bioavailable waters, and this is a very important one, is that they have a oxidation reduction potential for healing. They should be -200 and more minus. That's very important, because it's at -200. If I were to take a chicken, egg, and sperm and measure the oxidation reduction potential, that's when the egg and sperm come together, it would be -200. So the more minus I get, meaning -300, -400, -500, I get even more healing and faster healing. For many years, scientists have looked at the other end of the equation, or looked at the positive side of oxidation reduction potential, but never bothered to look at the other side. And so that what we're finding is, when it has that -200 and on, that we get a healing process. Now, the electrolysis machines do roughly minus 200 to minus 500. The red water, which I'll go into more detail on, begins at minus 500 and can go up to minus 900. Now, what's the difference in the red water and the electrolysis water is that things happen faster. Now, why is electrolysis additionally important? Dr. Born Nordstrom out of Sweden said, okay, these guys aren't going to believe any of this stuff, so I'm going to do my research and put it all, 100 research articles all in one book, and let them tear it apart and take a look at it. And what he found was that the body is loaded with electrolysis membranes. Your brain, your lungs, your heart, almost any interface with another organ has an electrolysis membrane in it, just like the electrolysis water machines. And so again, it's replicating nature in terms of what it does. Now, those are characteristics: structure, pH, ORP, or oxidation reduction potential. Now, in my work at Johns Hopkins several years ago, where I had a theory that water might make a difference if I could use it with some of our drug addicts. And I had the opportunity to work with female drug addicts who were either addicted to heroin or cocaine, or to both, or to heroin or cocaine and alcohol. Many of them were pregnant, and most of them had been addicts for at least 10 years. So we're not talking about a casual user. What I found, and again, they helped me prove this hypothesis, and I chose not to leave my work at Hopkins. Once I was able to prove that we were correct, decided it was time to move on. Now, what I found was just dealing with this slide. Now, for many of you, if you think of the body as a big battery, the brain is a big battery, or a big electrical receiver. And there's some of the odds that say, what are you talking about? I'm electrical. Oh, no? Well, what do you do when I put an EKG up to your chest? What do I measure but electricity? What do I measure when I do an EEG? Remember the old Dr. Kildare stuff and flat line? Well, it's measuring electricity as it courses through the heart and through the brain. What do I do when I do an EMG? I'm measuring electricity as it courses through your muscles and nerves. So you might get the idea there may be some electricity in this body. Well, in looking at the so-called addicts, what I found were a couple of things. They usually fell into one of two categories. On the left side there, we saw that salt, caffeine, nicotine, and cocaine all acted the same way. On the other side, sugar, alcohol, tranquilizers, marijuana, and heroin. You say, what are you talking about, Doc? Well, let's see what we got here. On the salt side, we're dealing with individuals who have pains, that are holding on to stuff. It's like pulling elephants out of quicksand. And those things act like the body's natural painkiller, which is tryptophan. On the other side, on the sugar heroin side, they act like two substances that, again, are produced by the brain, specifically serotonin and melatonin. If you don't know how to spell them, here we are. We'll call them Sarah and Mel for these purposes. Now, it sort of bothers me a bit when I see some kids at lunchtime or right after lunch, and I'm sure if there are any teachers in the audience, they usually say, I really hate to teach the kids in the afternoon because they're off the ceiling, or on their way to school in the morning with a soda and a bag of potato chips, or a candy bar and a bag of potato chips. What they're doing is this. They're actually overriding on one side and using the other side to counterbalance it. Now, I'm going to zero in on the sugar heroin side to say these things have a tendency to slow the brain down so that they can function. Now, who has fast-moving brains? Your babies and your dyslexics or your attention deficit disorder entities. Now, I hate that term because they are our geniuses. And I can say to anybody who has a young baby around that you know that they have some fast-moving brains. If I've got a fast-moving brain, I've got to put jet fuel into a jet engine. Now, I used to teach a course called Subliminal Dynamics. And in that course, we began to look at who was really handicapped, who really had the deficit. And I found that the so-called learned entities had the deficit. Because in that course, we started reading at 25,000 words a minute. And we could go up as high as 600,000 words a minute. Now, in regular reading, you can only read 250 words a minute. That's as fast as the fastest talker on the earth so far has been programmed to be able to read. 250 words a minute. So you see it, you say it, you read it. Okay, that's the way you teach read. Here comes Jane, there is, you say it out loud, you see it, whatever, okay? That's very slow to a fast-moving brain who wants to begin reading at 25,000 words a minute. Now, in that course, what we did was, the first test in the course is to give the whole group a thesaurus. Now, mixed in that group always, at least in the course that I taught, were so-called dyslexics, and then the learned, supposedly, you know, your accountants, your doctors, your lawyers, your teachers, etc. And invariably, the dyslexics always blew away the course because we gave them a thesaurus and we said, turn the pages of the book as fast as you can, upside down, backwards, just keep going through it until we tell you to stop. Then we took the thesaurus away, and in front of them, we placed a blank page and said, we gave them 10 words. We gave the whole group 10 words. And they had to write down what page that word had been on, all 10 of those words had been on, where on the page the word had been, meaning on the left side, right column, you know, upper or lower portion. And invariably, the dyslexics each time would get 8 out of 10 of those correct. Now, they didn't know the words ahead of time, so there was no cheating ahead to say, I'm going to be looking for where this word is. And the so-called learned often were good if they got one or got anywhere near the page. That's not in all cases, but in general, that's what was going on. So you get the picture that perhaps we have fast-moving brains. And when I do the studies done by the National Educational Association about how children learn, the curve looks like this. From infancy to 5 years of age, it's constantly going up. And at 5 years of age, it goes down for the rest of their lives. Now, what happens traditionally in American schools at 5? They go to school. So all that nice learning natural process gets programmed out of them. Now, often in dyslexics or attention deficit disorder individuals, somehow or another they never turn the key off. So their curve keeps going on. Now, if your brain wants to read at 25,000 words a minute, in the course you get up to 250,000 words a minute. Now, this isn't speed reading. With speed reading, you only retain what you learn to speed read for 30 days. In regular reading and studying, you retain that information for only 48 hours after you've read it. When you start learning subliminally, you will retain that information for the rest of your life. So when your grandmother said to you, boy, you think you're going to learn about sleep putting your head on that book? Yes, they could have learned it. Now, where do those statistics come from? National Education Association. And when we gave those dyslexics, individuals who had never read a book before in their life because they couldn't, not being taught the way that they were, individual at 16 years of age saying, okay, I've come long enough now I can drop out of school, and gave them the book, physics book, studied at Stanford University, nuclear physics book, 900 pages, and gave them an exam. Never saw the book before in their life, never took the course, and passed it at 90%. So you get the picture that a fast-moving brain and that there's something going on. Well, what kind of fuel am I going to put into that fast-moving brain? Well, I have a way of losing track of time. It has no meaning to me. But we found in the babies, in these fast-moving brains, this is about 4 years ago now, that the brains were loaded with these two substances, iridium and rhodium. And it stays loaded with those substances until they hit puberty. Then it begins to wane. So babies, up until puberty, have a brain full of iridium and rhodium. And what is loaded with iridium and rhodium? Some of the substances that many of you in the audience are familiar with. Carrots, grape juice, shark's cartilage, blue-green algae, Mexican yam, and other yams from great places like Africa. SEACT is loaded with iridium and rhodium. The Tahitian noni juice that many of you are aware of is loaded with iridium and rhodium. So that often when taking these substances for a fast-moving brain, it's like, yeah, I like that. These waters also calm the brain, and they find the same type of response as if they've just taken iridium and rhodium. So jet fuel for a jet engine. How about a high-frequency water? Now, serotonin and melatonin, where is it made in the brain? Just a cross-section here of the brain for just a minute. We find that it's made in the pineal gland, which is smack dab in the middle of the brain. In fact, there's an old crystal triangle there that I'll refer to a little later with the pituitary, the pineal gland, and the hypothalamus. Now, what about that gland? And what do we got going here? Now, here's my favorite little boy. This is Spiny. And Spiny, as you see at the bottom, says the body in harmony. Hormone is the ancient Greek word for harmony. And so when the seals are open, the body is in harmony. Doctor used the term seals. What's a seal? If you can think of something that opens and closes, a seal. Same seals that are referred to in Revelations, by the way. There are 7 seals in the body. In traditional medicine, these would be referred to as the endocrine system or your glandular system. They all produce hormones. Now let's jump quickly to the 4th seal here, or the thymus gland, that sits smack dab in the middle of your chest. Now, if I would ask most of my colleagues what the thymus gland did, well, the pineal gland did, they'd have to fumble a little bit, because that's not taught to us in medical school, maybe a sentence or two, but that's about it. But as I look at this 4th seal, let me tell you about some of the beautiful things that happen there. Notice that it sits right next to the heart. Studies have been done in physics to show that when you are happy, I don't know what it takes to make you happy, but let's say you are happy today. If I put an EKG up to your heart at that time, you would find that your heart would be beating to the rhythm of a waltz. That rhythm happens to be the energy that comes over and opens up the fourth seal, or the thymus gland. And an ultraviolet light and an ultraviolet liquid begins to emanate from that gland and goes down to the base of your spine and just sits there like a pool. So then when you're sitting in Indian style with your legs crossed and saying your prayers or meditating, it's just natural that that tailbone just happens to sit right into or slip right into that pool of liquid and begins to course its way up the spinal cord like this, opening up each one of those glands. Now again, there's no nerve, there's no wire coming from these glands to other parts of the body. And for years in traditional medicine, we haven't known, well, what makes them open and close? Well, I just told you, happiness opens up that fourth one, or the thymus gland. And that's your protection. That's the one that deals with your protection against infection. That deals with your protection against cancer. You build your immune system, okay? If I look at the sixth seal, which would be the pineal gland, one of my favorite glands, which is the sixth seal in that list of 7 seals, I find that serotonin and melatonin, back to old Sarah and Mel, are made in the pineal gland. Now, all of the bioavailable waters happen to cause the pineal gland to vibrate or to open up that gland. You can't even get to the 7th gland, the pituitary gland, unless the pineal gland is stimulated. But here's the rub. That pineal gland is also sensitive and of the same frequency, or what causes it to open and close, as microwave towers. What's a microwave tower? What do you have beamed with your cellular phone? Within probably 3-block radius of here, I'm sure you have at least 10 microwave towers in the city. So I am wearing out your pineal gland by you being exposed to that frequency because you had a natural advantage, because you were born with the beautiful pigment. We're all born with it, some more than others, that allow that pineal gland to operate at peak performance. It's simply melanin. And when I look at the black spot at the back of my eye called the macula, and understand that that should be loaded with melanin. And when I look at macular degeneration, which means that it looks like somebody spit into that area, there are white punctate spots in the macula, it's because you're no longer making melanin. It means you've been exposed to electromagnetic bombardment and your pineal gland has begun to shrink down and stop operating. Now, when you're a baby, that gland and your thymus gland are roughly the size of a walnut. If it has not been properly stimulated, it shrinks down to the size of a pea and stops operating. So again, it is very important, number one, that you put the right fuel into that brain so they can operate at peak performance, and you also want to shield that brain from the electromagnetic bombardment that is present today. So I've got to restore to it what it needs to allow it to operate at peak performance. Get the message? You have to have a natural substance to do that. Melanin in itself will absorb radiation. So how do I restore that? Again, the waters will allow that to happen. The noni juice will allow that to happen also. And that's a very special juice. You hear me referring to it because it even looks like, the plant itself even looks like the pineal gland, as does the pineapple, as does the pine cone. Very important. And to understand that in this setting, you are being bombarded. You have to put up a shield against that bombardment. What other thing turns on these glands? Music. So that the first seal is open, a very powerful seal, is opened by the beat of the bass drum. And when used appropriately, can be used to help move that energy up, opening up the seals. But if it's stagnant, if it gets there and has nowhere to go, then what's opened? Your male and female sex organs. Ever leave work and wonder, I didn't leave work feeling sexy today, but by the time you got home, something happened. Or looking at our athletes who are so focused, or entertainers who are so focused during their performance that they have moved that energy all the way up. And now all of a sudden it crashes down to the first seal. So what happens after a game or a performance? They all want to screw. If someone had just told them that was their most creative time, and if they'd gone out and begun to write, or to play music, it would have been fantastic, or to write music. Now, what opens up the upper seals? A violin. It's not in vogue for guys to play the violin. They turned them off. No, just the opposite. You should be encouraged to play the violin because it opens up those upper glands and allows the magic to happen. Now, what do I say when I say magic? Who's the more primitive? If I have to send a message to you over miles by a satellite or wires going under the ocean on a telephone, what's more primitive, that, or I can simply look on your face with my eyes closed and send you the message and you receive it? That's the natural advantage that you were born with and that you can do. All but 2% of the average brain is turned off. What do you think happens with the rest of that 98%? Just sitting there waiting for potential, for you to open it and allow it to happen. You were given all the tools. You just got to learn how to use them. And again, that body wants to be, that brain wants to be 90% water. Now, where else do we have brains? About 5 years ago in traditional medicine, we discovered that we have brains in our digestive tract. What's happening there? Where are they? In our tonsils? In our appendix? And if I were to go around this room, I'd probably find out that half of you no longer have either of those. Okay? Because several years ago, we didn't know what they were for. And the third place is in the first part of the small intestine. There's an area called Peyer's patches. Now, what do I mean by brains? You ever watch a toddler put everything in their mouth? I mean, everything they grab, dirt, the chair, your food, their food, the hat, whatever. They're collecting a diary of information. And in that diary it says, if later on I need a substance, I need to know what I can get from each of those substances. So that if I eat the red clay of Georgia, I know I can get iron from it if my body needs it. Now, where does it test it? As it passes the tonsils, it says, well, we need calcium today, we need a little potassium, give me a little manganese, etc. It proceeds on down this one long tube, because your digestive tract is one long tube, open on either end, mouth on one side, anus on the other. And we draw from it as it passes down that tube. So as it gets to that part of the small intestine, it says, nope, didn't take enough out. Guess we need some more. And it gets to the appendix and says, all right, we're getting ready to enter the large bowel. And what's the function of the large bowel? To say there's enough water in the body to send that 90% water up to the brain. Because if that brain stops, you stop. Now, if you talk to the average drug addict, and I'm going to say drug, remember all those things I had on that list. I didn't only have heroin, I had sugar there too. And I had alcohol. And by the way, a recovering heroin addict will usually become a alcoholic en route to getting better and will start craving sugar like crazy. Notice they don't have any front teeth most of the time because they crave sugar so much. So don't be on them. It's just as hard for you to come off that sugar or come off that salt or those cigarettes as it is to come off of the stronger illegal drugs. Because your body doesn't know legal versus illegal. It just knows it's hard to come off. Now, these brains are important because they dictate what you're allergic to, what you like and don't like, and what you eat. Now, one of my patients is a well-known entertainer that many of you would know. I won't say his name. But for years, he has gone and not liked onions. And he's giving me permission. So Ossie Davis doesn't like onions. He said, I don't know why I don't like onions. His mother's still alive. She is over 100. And I said, Mrs. Davis, why does Ossie like onions? She said, well, you know, in the old days when we were weaning babies from the breasts, we used to put onion juice on the nipple. So the association to him was something untoward happened when I was around that onion juice as I was collecting that diary during those first couple of years of life. So that registered as, that's not something I want. When we look at these brains and we look at allergies, we find that if I make the connection with food to something that wasn't so good, when I ate that food, I develop an allergy to it. So let's say I'm going to pick on peas because there's a number of people that don't like peas. And let's say it was a bad day at work for mom or dad. And they came home that day and I'm sitting at the table and there are peas in front of me. Well, my body just didn't happen to need peas that day. Okay? But eat your peas. But I don't want my peas. Eat your peas. But I don't want my peas. Next time peas introduced to me, it remembers that the last time we ate them, something didn't connect so well. So I'm not sure that I want them. So now I'm getting nauseous at even the thought of them, or I may actually throw up. Now, how do we prove that? We actually bypass the digestive tract and inject it into the, directly into the bloodstream, pea extract. Now, that should have made that entity very violently allergic because they were allergic to them if they ate them. Didn't touch them because it had bypassed those brains in the digestive tract. So get an idea that there may be brains everywhere. Getting the drug addicts to drink water, and if you ask them, how often do you drink water? Number one, they'll tell you up front, I don't like water. So it's very rare for me to drink water. Secondly, how often do they have a bowel movement? Anywhere from once a week to once a month. So water is having an impact. The increased tolerance for a drug, meaning they need more and more the longer they're on the drug, is because of the accumulation of it in the large bowel and in the tissues. Simply getting water to them, or getting them to agree to drink water, you will find that many of them can come off of their drugs non-toxically without having to introduce anything else, with the exception, of course, of working with their minds. We've proven that over and over again. Now, in the red water, which is one of the bioavailable waters, we found out coincidentally with using with addicts that within, now this is in smokers, within 45 days, their taste for cigarettes was gone. Just drinking 16 ounces of red water a day. They no longer had a taste for cigarettes. No toxins, nothing that's going to replace addiction with another one. Just water. We found drinking water from a machine. Same thing will happen, just takes a little longer. No toxic replacement. No putting in another form of nicotine to get off of nicotine. Just water. We also found that other addictions were lessened. Something as simple as the desire to shop. People no longer wanted to shop. That was all a coincidental finding. We were treating cancer patients. Just drinking a 16-ounce bottle of red water every day. Remember I talked about that crystal triangle between the pituitary, the pineal, and the hypothalamus? Hypothalamus is your pleasure center. So there's some connection. I can't answer why, guys, at this point, but this is what we're observing. Now, we throw around the term oxidant, antioxidant, and I thought I'd just take for a minute and look at to make sure you knew what an antioxidant was. And if I think of oxidation, I think of something that's rusting. If I put some metal outside and it rains after a while, that metal's going to rust. Well, if you can think of an oxidant, it's something that something is rusting in you or decaying in you. Another word for that decay or rust would be a free radical, because I have free roaming oxygen, not of the right kind, coursing through the body and causing you to rust faster. That free radical, another term for it, would be a cancer cell. All same thing. You're rusting, you're decaying on the inside because the wrong kind of oxygen is circulating. Now, when I look at deuterium sulfate, which I think you have an advertisement in your brochure there, one of the names of a deuterium sulfate is hydroxygen plus. What it does is to allow that wrong kind of oxygen not to be released, and in fact increase the release of good oxygen to your system, so that when you start looking at lung patients, your asthmatics, your emphysema patients, you find that their lungs, the muscle, number one, in their lungs become more flexible, and their oxygenation is better simply by adding those little drops to the water. So it's one of the processes. All of the waters work on the hydrogen side of what's in the water. When I think of H2O, I have a hydrogen and I have an oxygen. I want to release the good oxygen. I want to tie up the bad oxygen. Good oxygen is called nascent oxygen. That's the oxygen I truly want to breathe. Now remember, our air is lower than it should be with oxygen. So in some way, I've got to get the right kind of oxygen into my system. And by drinking water, adding deuterium sulfate, I can release it from the water itself and allow me to have better oxygen in my cells. The lemon. Dr. Carey Reams, a biophysicist and agronomist around the turn of the century, studied 280,000 foodstuffs for their electron spin and looked specifically at the hydrogen ion. All of them had a positive hydrogen spin with the exception of one substance, the lemon. So you thought that adding lemon to your water was just a fashionable thing, when in fact what it really does is releases what we call hydrogens with a negative charge to them. Now what's the significance of that? If I were to pick an organ in the body outside of the brain, it probably would be the liver as your hard-working organ. It sends all the minerals and vitamins where they need to go to different parts of the body. An infant to 5 years of age is loaded with negatively charged hydrogens. So that as you get older and more toxins develop, you don't have as many negatively charged hydrogens in the body. The lemon will help restore that. Some of you are familiar with Willard's water, with hydrogen peroxide being used as a water thing. That's how they work, is looking at adding more negatively charged hydrogen to the liver and allowing it to better perform. What else does the hydrogen, or the negative hydrogen ion, become involved with? Everybody's worried about getting older. And my colleague is going to go into that a lot more in her session, so I won't go into detail on this except to say that the more negatively charged hydrogens I have in my body, the more I'm going to loosen my DNA coil, and that means that I'm going to age slower. So you want those negatively charged hydrogens. Keep adding lemon to your water. You'll find that it will also help, among other things that it does, to help that liver. Now, what else are we seeing? And here's one of the bummers. Diabetics. When I look at our community in all the major cities where there are a number of Afro-Americans, I find that diabetes is rampant, and rampant for several reasons. But let's look at what we're finding on the discovery trail in traditional medicine now. We're finding E. coli, a bacterium, in the pancreas of usually adult onset diabetics. We're finding in juveniles, or the children that develop diabetes soon after birth, all the way up to roughly 25 years of age. We consider that juvenile diabetes, or when there's no more insulin left. We're finding viruses in the pancreas. And what we're noticing is, as you heard from Dr. Bodice, antibiotics aren't working. And in fact, they can't even get into the organ, into that organ to even work. So what am I going to use to get there and wipe out that organism, hopefully? All of the bioavailable waters will take care of that E. coli or those viruses in the pancreas. Studies to still be released by the University of Texas is going to demonstrate that officially in the not too distant future. What else are we seeing in terms of viruses and bacteria in the digestive tract? We're seeing, remember they came out with ulcers? It used to be, couldn't be by a bacterium. I mean, I was taught when I was in medical school that there was too much acid in the stomach for bacteria to exist. Wrong. They found the bacteria there and said, oh, gracious, we're going to have to take care of that bacteria to treat your ulcer. Well, within the last year, we have found in the first part of the small intestine, near those Peyer's patches, a little brain there we talked about earlier, there's bacteria there too. Now, there's not supposed to be bacteria there either, because just the opposite, the alkali coming from the gallbladder. Now, alkali is just as strong as an acid, but on the other end of the spectrum. And it's there to counteract some of the acid coming off the stomach, to sort of neutralize it. So it's supposed to be pretty strong in there. No bacteria, virus, or fungus is supposed to exist there. But we're finding bacteria in that part of the small intestine that is not responsive to antibiotics. We're finding viruses, and you'll love this. If I said to you that every living thing on the earth has what we call an electromagnetic signature, meaning that if I know the signature, I can find that thing, I don't care where it is, on the earth, and I can measure it. If I do what we call electromagnetic or electrodermal screening, or if I use a machine called the Prognos, which the Russians have been using since the Mira satellite went up. I'm not sure exactly when that was launched. They just let it come down. But for almost 15 years, they have known this and have been using this to look for these electromagnetic signals. But what are we finding? We are finding in that same first part of the small intestine viruses. Now, you know the polio virus, about, 40 years ago, people started having polio all over the place, all over the world. We are finding active oral sable polio vaccine virus in the first part of the small intestine. That was supposed to be a dead virus. It's coming up live in the first part of the small intestine. It's there. And if you think about the disease that is pretty current now, I mean,